What's going on, guys? It's Mark Reel Jr., the Father's Rights Attorney and host of the Father's Rights Playbook podcast. Tonight we have an extra special episode. Tonight we're going to have my conversation with Dr. Casey Sowers on the future of equal and shared parenting and father's rights. I hope you guys enjoy. On to the podcast. This is going to be the first time I've introduced him like this, but someone who I've gotten to know really well over the last couple of years and is someone who's done research in a very unique area. And that is Dr. Casey Sowers. Casey,
how you doing, Mark? Well, sir, how are you?
I am good. I'm good. We've been texting back and forth all night, and this event couldn't have gone any better. And I'm glad we get to finish it up together.
Absolutely. And I do want to put on a comment kind of where they closed off, and they were saying, if your child had cancer, you to be by their bedside. And I know emotions when you go through this are extreme, ups and downs, and you're like, I'm going to go to court and it's going to be over, and then it doesn't go the way you think it did, and then you're down, and it's crazy. And this is what personally worked for me, and I would recommend it to anybody. I can't see why it would ever fail anybody. Is you need to, if you ever are faced with this situation, if you're in this situation now, you need to think about it not as I'm going to go to court and I'm going to do this, and this is what's going to happen. You need to think that if your child is 5, you're going to be doing this for the next 13 years until that child is 18, and really even beyond, because you're still tied to that other parent. If it's a high conflict thing, so if you can, it will completely change how you view and how you react to things if you're able to set your expectations and your game plan out that far. Play the long game. And that way, when they do something, you're like, you can take a step back and say, you know what? I know what they're doing. They're wanting me to react, but this is what's going to happen. And, you're able to approach it much more calmly, collectively. And you're not on that roller coaster of being up and down. It allows you to think a lot more clearly and make better decisions.
Yeah, I tell a lot of our clients that you signed an 18-year contract, but it wasn't with a pen.
Right.
So couldn't agree more. So I want to turn over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? And I think the most interesting part of you is what you've been doing, I guess what culminated your last couple of years of work.
Right. So as you know, and some watching may know, I was for 2 years, I was executive director for the Father's Rights Movement. And I stepped down in October of last year. My bandwidth with work and school and everything just got way too much, stretched way too thin. And I wasn't able to do everything as effectively in all the areas that I wanted to. And the needs that the Father's Rights Movement needed at the time really needed more hands-on, day-to-day operational approach. So I stepped down, but I'm not out of the cause. And that's one thing. We've got a lot of great organizations. They've been on here tonight. Chris Cole, Mark, I mean, everybody. There's lots of people. And I think Mark Ludwig said at the beginning, 4 years ago, this was a completely different scenario, this cause and everything that we're being involved in. And it's changed. It has changed a lot. People are working together collaboratively. They're not, working against each other. So that's great. And in doing that, when I started working with the Father's Rights Movement, I was in the heat of my child custody dispute. And I was also starting a doctorate degree about midway there. And I was doing something on machine learning and natural language processing. And it was a business degree, right? So I'm trying to do something in that realm. I'm like, man, if only I could compound my time. But, this child custody dispute, that's law, that's psychology, it's not business. Or is it? When my attorney's office hours are 9 to 5. So when I'm at work and I need to talk to him about something, I'm out in the hallway talking to my attorney. I'm not at my desk, or I'm reviewing, state statutes or organizing files for upcoming court hearing or records. And so I got thinking, well, how much of my time is really robbed from my employer, my distraction, my lack of sleep, stress, from this child custody dispute. And I did what I thought was, realistic but conservative. I said, okay, 25%. And I took that by the number of parents affected. So there's 13,000 custodial parents, excuse me, around 13 million custodial parents nationwide, which means that for every custodial parent, there's a non-custodial parent. So you're looking at 26 million people, and that works out to like 13% of the entire U.S. workforce of working age individuals 18 to 55. Times the median average salary of $55,000 a year is a significant number. Just 25%. You're looking at $250 billion a year in lost productivity. Now, this is significant because, and I know a lot of people that have heard this before, like, who cares about the corporations? Like, who cares if they're losing money? This is my child. Well, you care. And here's why. And I don't need you to confirm or deny this, Mark, because I don't want to get you in trouble with anybody. But the Bar Association, it's been hinted to me by multiple people, well, they want to keep things divisive because, well, that, the people within their association, that's their livelihood, right? So they're feeding off of this. So they they're the biggest adversary in getting laws changed, the bar associations in each state, because they think it's better, more financially, beneficial to keep things divisive. So corporations, what do they do with a lot of their money? Well, they have lobbyists in the Capitol. They put their money towards campaigns for legislators. Well, if corporations realize, hey, we're losing millions of dollars a year for a single organization, nationwide, billions, maybe they'll change where their campaign dollars go. There's a book, Divorce Court, estimates that the divorce industry is a $55 billion a year industry. How does a ragtag group of subjugated fathers that are broke, and if they speak up about anything, they're going to go to jail for contempt of court, how do they stand up against a $55 billion industry? Well, in the military, what you do is, if you're outgunned, you switch to guerrilla warfare. You attack supply lines. And supply lines in this case is money from corporations that go to campaigns. So that's why it matters. That's why we care about how this affects corporations. Because once they realize that, and then they start changing where they put their campaign dollars, they also do other things that will help their bottom dollar, but it's an alignment of interest because it also helps our cause. It helps equality. And I won't say just fathers. It helps equality, mothers, fathers, children. When I went through my custody dispute, I went for 50-50. And I was, the respondent. And I had an option because the way the case went that my attorney's like, we can go for more than 50-50. I was like, yeah, we could. But it's the principle of the matter. I'm not trying to take my daughter away from her mother, even if, some ways I feel that would be better interest for my daughter. It's about equality. So when I did the pilot study, I found a lot of data that I'll be going through for years, really. One of the things I actually found is that, National Parents Organization, they did a report card for each state, giving them an A, B, C, D, F, based on a qualitative review of their state laws and how equal they were. And the study that I got, I wanted to use states that I got at least 100 responses for, minimum. And so the highest grade state that I got that minimum was Arizona. And then the other state was New York, which had an F. Arizona had an A-. However, the data also showed that on average, both parties spent more money in Arizona than they did in New York. Well, if the Bar Association's theory is correct, that keeping things divisive makes them more money, why are people spending more money in Arizona than they are in New York? Well, what do you know if you're a father in New York? You're going to go to court, you're going to spend a lot of money, and you're not going to win anyway. So let's just skip that part. Let's start paying child support. And when he doesn't pay an attorney, neither does the mother, because she didn't have to fight back. She didn't have to defend everything he throws back. But in Arizona, where they're on a more equal playing field, just like David and Goliath, I'm 5'9". So if I go up against a guy that's 6'7", I'm not as likely to try and start a fight. But maybe I won't back down as much if the guy's, also 5'9". So maybe I'll put a little bit more fight into it because I actually have an opportunity of winning. Same situation. The more equal chance of winning that they have, the more intense they'll fight. Thus, they spend more money. Now, I'm not trying to say that people need to spend more money or that they should have to. Absolutely not. But if we can get those laws to where they're equal, maybe we can reduce the amount of people that have to go through that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting piece about the bar associations, because so I've seen recent numbers that say by 2025 that you're looking at an $80 billion a year industry where 75% of the money is spent by men.
I have no doubt.
And I think the bar associations, it's less about money, at least from my seat. I'm a member of the bar, and it's more about attorneys are risk averse. This is the way things have been. And you're slowly, as more people are, say, I'm 32 years old, more people that are in my generation become members of the bar, we're seeing people more and more open to doing things differently. So it's a very interesting dichotomy. So I think what was most interesting with yours is the perspective, the impact it has on major corporations, because you're going to go to them and you tell them 13% of your workforce is going through a child custody dispute. And no one going through a child custody dispute is going to be able to give 100% at anything they do. So, what did your research tell you about? Did you look into productivity, how that impacts corporations?
Absolutely. So there's the way the model is, the independent variable is whether or not somebody had been in a child custody dispute. Now that's hard to measure on a binary variable. So I had to throw a third metric in there. And so what I did is I measured people that were indirectly exposed to the child custody dispute. So new girlfriends, the grandparents, things like that. So they're one removed. So they're within proximity. And then you also have the people that they've never been involved in a child's custody dispute, and they've never been close to anybody that's been through one. Right. So we've got a bit of a scale there now. So you take that and then, okay, what's the impact of mental and emotional health? And I used a validated scale for that. I used Goldberg's 12 question questionnaire on general health questionnaire. That's a mediator. The impact of mental and emotional health. Now, there's a lot of different roads I can go down to with this, but I had to keep it within scope. That mental and emotional health acts as a mediator and impacts the dependent variable, which is employee productivity, which I also used a validated scale. I think it was a 17-item employee performance self-report. Now, I used the self-report because I know when I was going through my thing, if my employer asked me, "Hey, are you slacking off at work? Are you, doing this?" I'm going to be like, "Nope, absolutely not," because I can't lose my job. I got to pay my attorney. I got to pay my bills, right? So you use a self-report because they're a lot more likely to give you personal information that they might not give otherwise. Now, this is where the real measure is the moderators. So between the independent variable of whether or not they've been in a child custody dispute and the mental and emotional health, I measured moderators. I actually have my model up here in front of me. So let me list them off for you. And I did control for age, gender, race, ethnicity, income, education, employment, all that kind of stuff. And there's a really interesting list of factors when you start putting in combination of things, because we're not just one of those things, right? But the moderators that I measured is whether or not being the petitioner respondent has a moderating effect on mental and emotional health. And overwhelmingly, yes, it does. Hey, Mark, what percentage of the time is the father the respondent? Right. Last I heard it was like 79.9 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the respondents have a significantly higher impact to their emotional health, or a negative impact, I'll say. So they're significantly more impacted, and as they were talking earlier, having that first mover advantage, as the person without that first mover advantage, you're always on the defense. You're always defending yourself. That's going to significantly impact. You're the one that, maybe the other party took off with the child. You don't know where they're at, and you're waiting to get to court to be able to see them. That's going to impact your mental health because they had the first mover advantage. The second one is whether or not time sharing determination was agreed upon by both parties or ordered by a judge has an impact to mental and emotional health. And it does, but not to a significant amount. It does overall, but not between the two. And then whether or not you were the custodial parent, if that has an impact, and whether or not you were married to the other party. Now, the thing is those last three, if you start taking combinations of those, you get some really, really interesting stuff. And in my defense of the dissertation, they asked me, well, why didn't you do this? And I was like, well, because we only had a limited amount of time to really get in and analyze this. But it is set for future research. Absolutely. But one question that I had in there that I asked all three of the different groups within the independent variable, those directly affected by a child custody dispute, those indirectly affected by a child custody dispute, and those not ever exposed to a child custody dispute, they were all within 1% of each other on how much a person would be affected throughout their workday or work week if they were involved in a child custody dispute at 55%.
Wow.
So you take that, through the other statistics that we walked through earlier, we're looking at a employee productivity loss of near $900 billion nationwide. And that's just the US. Now, this isn't just a US issue. This is a worldwide issue. So some of the remedies are, okay, change where the campaign dollars go and start incorporating whether it be co-parenting counseling, mental health, more mental health stuff, reduce legal services into employee assistance programs. Now, this is all, 10,000 foot view, just so people can put this into perspective and see how it hits home. If you work for a 10,000 person organization, they're looking at an impact or a productivity loss of $72 million a year. Do you think that's significant to them? Yeah. A 2,000 person organization is somewhere around $14.5 million a year in productivity losses. That's significant. That's above what our target growth rate is for GDP as a nation. So, I mean, this goes into completely, international economics and everything else. It's that at that scale. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate down to the individual that's currently going through that. And I understand that. I do. But I think that's in it when you're going through, it's really hard to think beyond that. And I think that's, why one of the reasons this is so significant. When we were in Kansas City at that conference and we had that senator there, and I asked him, I said, hey, if somebody came to you and they had stats on how much money corporations are losing, for their constituents, would that be, important? Would that be significant for you? And the guy just froze, like, I've never thought about that. He's like, yeah, that would be really important. I'd talk to him. So where I'm at now is I've done this study, I've done the data. I have everything, and I would love to just put it out there, but that would take away the weight of it. So now I have what I'm doing now is I'm working to get it published in a academic journal, which is what will really give it weight. Put the math in there, and my hope is to spur, even if people disagree with it, and they go and redo this study to try and disprove me, perfect. Do it, because I know that it's there. I know that it works. Yeah. I know it's 100% correct. And even in just doing that, it just confirms exactly what this confirms my study is what it'll do.
I think that's the crazy thing for me. Your study is so different, but it's a cog in this really 30-year body of research that says maximizing time with each parent, lowering conflict and divorces, improves every aspect of every single individual touched by the family court system.
Well, one of the things that I found was, when you listen to people talk, and it's he said, she said, and this and that, and he did this, and I mean, I can imagine being a judge and just listening to both sides all day long and just be like, what, I don't believe either one of you. I'm just tired of hearing things going back and forth. Well, here's some statistical facts. Or people argue, well, there's no science to back that up. Well, now there is. That was one of the points of this study. Let's put something on the books. Let's get some concrete stuff, not subjective, not qualitative, where you can kind of interpret it a certain way. Just math. Just that's it. Quantitative, statistics.
Yeah, that's going to be a major player. I mean, we keep stacking research in different areas. We keep stacking more thorough studies as technology improves. And I mean, when you and I met, we had one state. We had the state of Kentucky, which has the presumption, but it's a very flawed law. Now we're sitting here today. We've known each other, 2-3 years, and 10% of the states have a presumption of 50-50 custody. We talked about the big picture. What do you see moving forward on the ground with really, I think both of us refer to it as the snowball that keeps rolling downhill?
I've said this for at least 2 years. I think equality between parents worldwide is inevitable. It cannot be avoided. It's just a matter of how quickly and smoothly we can get there. Okay. It's, in everything that everybody's discussing, the alienator, the parent, are they even aware that they're doing it? Nobody's ever the villain in their own story, right? Yeah. So now we're getting into individuals' perception of reality and how they interpret other people's actions and things like that. It's a question I posed to my daughter a few months ago. If everybody were blind, always, everybody all through history, always been blind, does color exist? Well, we know it does because we can see. But if we were never able to see, we wouldn't know it. So you take that and then you look, and I've always used this analogy, but we're sitting on a bus in 1950 and a black man gets on. Where does he sit? In the back of the bus. Whether we agree with it or not, somebody made the exact phrase earlier. This is just the way it is, the way we've always done it. But people come to realize, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right. And that's where we're at now in history. Okay. I'm not saying we've necessarily had our Rosa Parks moment yet. Okay. But that's where we're at in history. And I'm not comparing atrocities. I'm just talking perception of reality. And, because you don't know, like the reality, the colors existing or not existing is whether or not you've experienced this as a father. I didn't know. I mean, yeah, people like, oh yeah, you get the kids every other weekend. You don't think anything of it because that's the way it's always been. You just go about your day until you go through it. And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. There's so much more here. This is really messed up. When I was executive director, TFRM, I hired out some writers. They're like, well, what do you want me to write? He's like, I never even knew this was an issue. What do you want me to write? I said, well, write about how you never even realized this was an issue. So unless you're really exposed to it, most people aren't even aware of it. It's not even in their realm of reality. So podcasts like Chris Cole's, like Kenneth Rosa have done, like you've done yourself, and this book, bringing that awareness and educating people, educating the public, educating legislators. That's all a part of it. And you could say, oh, well, this is wrong and this is wrong. And the legislators, just like the judge, oh, yeah, I understand. Wait a minute, now we're talking dollars? Okay, now I'll listen to you. Because that's campaign dollars for me if I can help out my company, that's sponsoring, my run for governor or what have you. Now they're going to start listening, and all those other things that they've been hearing are going to start coming together and making sense, and they're going to be like, wow, oh, okay, they had something, but they just weren't able to perceive it yet because they hadn't experienced it.
I think you touched on a really good point, and I think I'm probably a little more bullish on the comparisons than you are. I mean, in the 1860s, we had slavery abolished. In the 1920s, we had suffrage. In the 1960s, we had the civil rights movement. Uh, in the early to mid 2000s, we had the LGBT movements and gay marriage being legalized. This issue impacts a larger number of people than any of those issues did. And we have to realize that every single one of those issues, I use slavery to the civil rights movement. We abolished slavery and said this is wrong. And it took us 100 years, three and a half generations to actually take that next full step. We're only 20 or so years into somebody raising their hand and saying the research doesn't say mom is better. We're still early in this journey. And we talk about an $80 billion a year industry. We talk about 26 million parents. How many people are secondary contacts to a custody dispute? Grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins that are impacted by this. I think I've been saying now, I used to say the next 3 to 5 years. I think I now have to say the next 1 to 3 years. We're just going to see this avalanche where even, we'll say it, the blue states have been resistant to it, are going to have to admit there needs to be change.
Well, I mean, if you really go in and look at it, the 1948, the United Nations find a Declaration of Human Rights, and the way the laws are written in many of the states, it violates at least 5 of the I think there's 30 declarations that they make. So it's actually a violation of human rights as defined by the United Nations, which the United States signed on in 1948. So they're breaking their own rules.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that you brought up slavery. And I'm sure there are points where slaves didn't even really realize they were slaves. They realized they weren't getting the same treatment as other people, but it was in their reality. This is just the way it is. Well,
Yeah.
let's look at the way the system is now. We're taken to court, we're subjugated, we're told to shut up. If we don't shut up, we go to jail. If we don't work, we go to jail. Just work, shut up, pay your child support. Title 4D circulates that money around the government. And what's the best way that you can have a slave is for the slave not to know they're a slave.
Yeah.
It's modern day. That's all it is. They just change the way that they do it. Now, I'm not saying that this was
100%.
ever a divine, conscious plan. But if you really get down and look at the nuts and bolts of it, not much different, really.
Well, some of it is. There's a lot. Warren Farrell, who is, I guess, the godfather of a lot of this space, points to women's organizations in the 1960s propagating mothers being the superior parent. And those that spoke out, including Warren, were pushed out of these organizations. Craziest thing, men's rights advocate Warren Farrell started his career as one of the foremost feminists and was pushed out of the movement when he said, hey, in the 60s and 70s, when he raised his hand and said, hey, this research points to something different than we're pushing.
And that's a big problem in research is it can be influenced so much by what a person wants to see the outcome be. Now, I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something, but maybe it'll come back.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep. We're about 40 minutes here, and I want to give you a chance to all the fathers. We've literally had thousands of people tonight on the live stream. what advice would you have with them? You're a father who's been through family court, come out the other side, and you've built this life. You have this research. You have everything going on. What advice would you give to a guy who's maybe 5-7 years behind you and has the bulk of his family court time ahead of him?
If someone outside of your family was threatening your child, what would you do? Even if it was a short-term threat, long-term threat, what have you, you would protect your child with whatever means you have. You would be smart about it, strategic. And that's exactly what I would recommend. When I went into my family court thing, I set my expectations, my timeline out. This is a long game. I can't be reactive, because that's exactly in the family courts what gets you in trouble. You get reactive, and then they say, "Oh, look, that's him. That's what I'm scared of." Because they want that reaction out of you. When you change your focus and your goal, and you set your timeline out, you're able to see it a little bit different. Be steadfast. Be strategic in your movements, and not to manipulate the situation, to control yourself, to be the person you are. And remember, you're not doing this to get back at somebody. You're doing this, you're protecting your child. Sometimes there, just like in the US, there are foreign threats and there are domestic threats. And somebody that's potentially mentally unstable is a domestic threat. And I'm not saying that's always the case. I'm just using it for an example. Instability. So going through the family court system can be a threat. So you need to make that as calm and, intentional of a path as you can make it. Yeah. And I try to, I kind of picture a boulder in a stream when I say that. A lot of stuff is going to be thrown at you, looking for a reaction. Be steadfast. You don't have to react to everything. You don't have to respond to everything. And as a matter of fact, I've gotten messages. Well, I sent you this, and this. Yes. And they were sentences. They did not have question marks in the end. Thus, they didn't elicit a response. You ask a question, I will give you an answer. That's it. If you make statements trying to incite something, I'm not going to react to it. So, and your anger, your frustration, it's gonna eat at you. What you need to do, remember why you're there. You're there for your children, regardless of everything else going on. Let everything else just blend into the background. You're there for your children. You're their protector.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Very true. Very true. Hey, Casey, thank you for your time. We've been live here for 3 hours, and I know some of you have been here since we went live 3 hours ago. I couldn't appreciate you guys anymore. Casey, all the other speakers. I actually just got a note during this that shipping of our book's going to be delayed a few days because we've gotten so many orders for the book. So that's awesome. I love being able to spread the word. And for everyone out there, keep fighting the good fight, and we'll catch you guys some other time. What's going on, guys? It is Mark Reel Jr., the Father's Rights Attorney, and on August 7th, I am releasing my first book, The Father's Rights Playbook. My introduction to family law was my own family law case and going through the family court system. And in doing that, my eyes were open to the injustices that occur and the trials and tribulations that fathers are put through. So it was a personal experience, and then my eyes were open to this broad systemic issue, which has inspired me to build this firm and now